Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be working on the Unit 5 coding assignment based around summary queries. The information here is going to be extracted from the classic models database, which you should already have loaded inside of MySQL Workbench. If there's some chance, outside chance, that you don't have this loaded, then you'll need to load it up. And I just want to refresh your memory as to where you can find it. The first thing I would do is I would go into MySQL Workbench, get attached to your database, and then just see if it's in the schema list. And you can see with me it is, right? And we've played with this one a bit before, so it should be there. But I'm just saying that if you didn't have it loaded, or who knows, maybe you moved yourself to a different computer or something. A lot of people aren't aware that I have this course resources page here. And if you look inside here, you can actually find the SQL file that creates the classic models database. And if you click this title, it will download the SQL file to your downloads folder. You import that or open it inside of MySQL Workbench and then run all the queries and it builds the database, right? We've done this already, but I just kind of want to point that out just in case somebody deleted it for some reason or never loaded it in the first place. That's a possibility. All right, so we have that here. I'm going to create a new SQL file, and to make sure that we're using that database, what's the first command you type? The use statement, right? So we're going to say use classic models semicolon, and we will run that query, and we should see our output window here, which I've collapsed down to nothing, but it did attach. So now all of our queries will attach to that. The first instruction that we have, and I'll zoom in a little bit, says create a query with a count of all the customers grouped by country. Sounds familiar, right? Just like the examples we were looking at. So now you guys finally figured out why I wasn't necessarily showing those on screen. And I'm going to move my solutions over to the other screen here. And okay, this isn't really a very hard one to do, but because we're doing like these summary queries now, there's different terminology that we're throwing in. Most notably, the fact that we're using a function now with intent instead of as an example. And we're doing a group by statement, which is really the summarizing piece of it. So let's kind of build this real slowly and you'll see where we're going with it. So I'm going to drop down a couple of lines, and I guess this is exercise 1 if you want to label it that way. I'm not going to label mine, but you maybe should label yours. I think that's kind of helpful. And then, of course, you're going to screen capture the query and the output and drop that into your document, right? So all right, so we know we're going to start with the select statement, so let's just get that typed in. The ask, again, was, get to the document, create a query with a count of all the customers grouped by country. All right, I think it behooves you, right, if you've forgotten what your customer table looks like, to click on it in the schema table here, or the schema side panel, and look at the structure. And if helpful, use that last icon there to generate some output and see what the heck is in there, right? And I think that's really helpful too. And I'm trying to get that double arrow there to look at the contents. But you notice customer number, name, contact last, first, phone, address, etc. And then there's a credit limit and address information. Okay, so we kind of have I think somewhere in there is a country designation, right? And I'm kind of scrolling through, and it doesn't look like I have any null data in the country area, so everybody should get pulled in, right? We have some like states and postal codes that are null, and lots of address line 2 that are null, but the countries all look pretty complete, right? I could, if I wanted, I could manually go in there and start going with, there's one for France, one for USA, one for Australia, 2 for France. You know what I mean? And the whole reason we're going to use a count function is to kind of bypass that misery, if you will. So what we will do is we will count the customer number, right? And see, I'm calling it by name. And right now, I'm already forgetting what table I'm attached to. So this is me. I know my query is not quite done yet, but I want to, okay, what table am I taking this from? Customers. Let's spell it right. And eventually we know we're going to use a group by statement. But we're going to count the customer number. So each unique customer has a unique customer number. So we're going to count those. And then if it's helpful for you, and this is, I would call this optional step, I'm going to alias it. I'm going to say number of customers, right? Because otherwise, what's going to be in the column? If I'm counting and then I'm outputting it, what's the column header going to be if I don't put in an alias? I'm not really quite sure. How do you find out? Try it. You know, it's kind of my answer. So we're pulling the customer number and counting it, and that's going to go in a newly generated column called number of customers. And then we're also going to pull in the country name so we can see, like, for example, 5 Australia, that kind of thing. That's coming from the customers table. Now here comes the summary part of it. We are going to group by the country. So in other words, let's take all the Australias together, all the Germanys together, all the Egypts together, whatever, you know, think of a country name, and we'll group them together. And then I also think it's helpful to do an order by, and either, you know, like what country we have the most customers in at the top, or maybe at the bottom, right? Or to group the information or sort the information in a meaningful way. So I'm going to say order by the count of the customer number. Let's see if I can type that in. And we'll do that descending. The country with the most will be listed at the top. Right, check your syntax, make sure everything's okay. Unless I'm taking a bite of a burrito while I'm recording a video because I'm hungry. I'll call it breakfast and lunch. And then I'm going to go ahead and run that query. And this is what I'm getting for output. Okay. And it's a pretty extensive list, right? So like we're kind of doing what they did on W3 schools, right? I mean, it's really kind of the same processing. The country with the most number of customers is at the top, and then we have a descending list here. So if I was to screenshot this, you know, I might do something to the effect of, and yeah, I'm kind of zooming out a little bit. I mean, I think this is potentially, we could almost screenshot the whole thing at once, but I'm still having a few people that are struggling with this. So what I would do is I would normally grab the query separately, and I would copy that. And then in the document, I would delete the sample, paste in the query. See how nice and big and readable it is? Yeah, okay. Hopefully you see that. And then I would also grab the output. Ideally, you would find a way to grab all the output, but in this circumstance, I would just try to get as much as you can on the screen. And then I would do that screen grab. And I would probably, I'd probably get kind of tight like that. And there is more, obviously, and I know that, right? And then put that into the document also. So I demonstrate this basically just to show everybody, you know, how to make it readable on the screen. I'm going to make that just a tad smaller because I also kind of want it to be on the same page. But that's my output. Notice how the output is roughly, the font inside the output is roughly the same size as the font in the document. And that makes it readable for me when I see it in bright space and grade it. I'm assuming this one worked okay for everybody? Okay, great. Let's move on to the second one. This one says create a query with a count of each of the product lines. Okay, so now we have to go back in to the database here. Let's go back to MySQL. And then I'm going to click on the product line table. And then I'm looking at the information. And once again, I don't remember it all. So I'm going to actually look at what's in that table. And I'm just putting it up on screen here and just taking a look. So we have the product line as part of a description of the product line. And then it looks like there's an HTML field that's empty and an image field that's empty. But that's not unusual, like in a database that you might have a link to a web page or a link to an image, or in some cases actually include that information inside here. So maybe it might be written in HTML code and it's part of your database. And then that actually gets fed to an actual website on the far end, especially with MySQL. Remember, MySQL is a tool that's the predominant database tool for web-based content management systems. So it's not an unusual thing to find. All right, so I'm looking at the list here, and okay, so classic cars, motorcycles, planes, ships, trains, trucks, buses, and vintage cars. Okay, so that makes sense. Very much like that MySQL tutorial website that we were looking at. So now we need a query with a count of each of the product lines. All right, so let's kind of look at what we've done already here on our SQL file. And the one thing that we've done already is we kind of did that with just customers, right? So would the next query be pretty darn similar? And the answer is yes. So this is basically practice, folks. So this time we're going to count. What are we counting this time? The product line. We're going to alias the output as, and I'm doing the pound sign thing, number of product lines. Not number of products, mind you, right? That's a different thing. And then we're also actually wanting to look at what that product line is, cars, trucks. This is coming from which table? This is kind of interesting because I have like two different tables that because I was just looking at the product line table, wasn't I? Yeah. And you know what? This is easy here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? 7. I'm done. I don't need to run a query because I can just see it. But when I look at my solution here, I might also want to consider the products table, right? And why might I want to look at that one? So I'm just going to pull this in. Right. Do you notice as I'm looking at this information that the product line is indicated here? So now I know I can just run a count on the product line table and get my answer. But I'm doing it in a more convoluted way on purpose here to show you that I can go into a different table and still get the information. So rather than pull it from where you think, so what I'm saying is some of you might just say, count a product line from the product line table and you're done. And in fact, you know what? Can we just do that? And I think this is kind of an interesting experiment. So I wouldn't call this the answer, but I think some people, like if they weren't watching this video, would totally do this. And if I was looking at the product line table, which column would I really need to look at? Well, probably the first one. Seems pretty logical, right? So I would say count product line and really this part would be identical, right? From the product lines table, and that's it. And I'm just going to run that query, and I just want to show you that it works, right? I think, or did I get an error? What's the error message it's giving me? It's saying, well, you're doing an aggregated query, but you're not including the group by statement. So it's telling me it's not working because I don't have the group by. So I would still need to group by what? Product lines. product line, actually. All right, now let's run it. And you can see it gives me the count of each one of them. And notice how the output's kind of like, yeah, whatever, kind of boring, right? Because, all right, do I really need this column? No, not really. I just need the count or the output of it, right? So I could output it that way. So I'm going to say this approach is probably not the approach you want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and build it then off of the products table. So I'm going to say from products, got to spell it right, right? We are going to group by product line, and then we'll do our order by again, and we're going to put a count here. So kind of like what we did above. This is very similar approach, but notice that we're not attaching necessarily to the table we thought we were attaching to, because now this can not only tell us or show us how many product lines we have, it'll show us how many things we have in each product line. That's really the better description. All right, so I'm getting an error again. Oh, and what is my error message? Unknown column product line, right? So that's a common mistake, but this is like when you don't get your output, you look at your error messages and like, oh, did I misspell something? And most of the time it's that. So let's run it again. And now we have an output. And once again, notice now we see how many things are in each category. That's much more useful. Right, you guys see that? This is a good output. Okay, so that was the second exercise. Paste your screenshots in there. Okay, the next one has a little bit of math in it. All right, don't worry, we're not doing the math. You know, the database is going to do the math for us, or the database engine really. It says create a query that calculates the average payment amount by customer having an average payment greater than 10,000. So we're getting an average, right? And then we only want to see the ones that have an average greater than 10,000. So this is where we're going to throw in our first having clause. That's our filter for extracting that information. All right, I'm going to go back over to MySQL Workbench, put a couple blank lines there, and create a query that calculates the average payment amount by customer having an average payment greater than 10,000. Now, do you guys notice that there's no information being provided here about what table to go to? You guys starting to pick up on that fact? Because this is the kind of statement that like a manager would say to like a database person, hey, can you write me a thing that tells me like the average payment for anybody that had an average payment greater than 10,000? And they don't know what table it comes from, what column to look at, how the tables are linked. All they know is they want the information, right? It's up to us to figure out those pieces. Now, where would we figure out from our database? And these are the questions you have to start to ask. All right. Well, they want us to figure out average payments. So maybe we should go to payments and maybe we should take a look at that table. Oh, okay. So that links to a customer. So I might have to, I might have to join tables. You know, this is the kind of question you start to ask, but he wasn't asking for he or she, right? I shouldn't say he, right? Was asking necessarily for a piece of information of which customers. I just want to see this average, you know, so it's all in how you read the question, right? So like what information you provide. So you might write a query and then in the aftermath, they come back at you and say like, why didn't you put their name on there? You know, that kind of thing. So that's something you have to, you know, wrestle with as you do this stuff. All right. So this is what I had written last time I wrote this one. So I said, select the customer number, which is present in the product line table, right? Or excuse me, in the payment table. And then we want to look at the average, and what was the column name there? Amount. Okay, so we're going to take the average of the amount column. Okay. I want to go back and look at the amount column. So here's what I'm looking at. Everything's rounded to 2 decimal places. So I should be fine, right? I should just be able to do an average and that'll work out really nicely for output, right? That's the thinking. Yeah, so the answer is actually no. Because if I take a bunch of these and add them together and then divide them by the number that there are, there's a chance I might get like the decimal point might be like 10 decimal places long. I really don't know. So I do need to round that also. So this is where we take the round function and we'll wrap it around the average function. So first we're going to average it, right? So whatever happens inside the parentheses happens first. And then we'll round that average so we only get 2 decimal places. So after the average statement, I put in a comma and a number 2, and that'll set it to 2 decimal places. So what are we rounding? The average amount to how many decimal places? 2. The averaging happens first. Whatever's on the inside happens first, and then we do the outside function. And that's going to output a new column, right, that we don't have. So you might want to output it as, I don't know, I'm just kind of doing something like this, average payment. And notice I didn't put quotes around it because I put an underscore in there. Depends on how pretty I want it, that'll work. We've already determined that this comes from the payments table. All right, let's group it by customer number. And we are putting a criteria on it. Remember, so now we're not going to use the where clause. We're going to use a having statement. So we're going to say having an average, once again, of the amount that is greater than 10,000. Notice no commas in the 10,000, folks. And then let's do a little ordering, a little sorting. We'll say order by average payment, the new column we just created. All right. So will this list the biggest numbers first or the smallest numbers first? All right, let's see. We have one guess for biggest here, and it's actually the other way around. Because usually we sort from smallest to biggest, right? Start counting with the number 1. If you want it the other way, then you say descending. Okay. All right, but this is the example. I think this is kind of interesting because, okay, we have a customer number and the average payment, but once again, and I want you to notice why did I do it like this? Because I looked at the output, right? And it didn't have the customer name in here. If the customer name was also included, I could do an inner join, pull in the customers table and connect that number to the customer name and actually include the name too. I would argue that a manager probably would want to see that, right? But that's not what's being asked here based on the example. So if you guys are wondering why I did it like this is why I did it like this. You guys all good? All right. So this next one says, create a query that totals all the payment amounts by customer. All right, let's go ahead and do that one. All right. Now, we already know what's in the payments table. And once again, I noticed that the example showed just a customer number. So what we're looking for now is the sum, right? So we're trying the sum function at this point. So I think I can write this one pretty quickly. It shouldn't be like a super huge change from the last one. In fact, I think it's a much simpler query in a way. So I can select, all right, let's pull in the customer number because we want to see that at the very least. And then we want to do a sum this time of the amount And we'll probably alias that as total uh, payments, right? Because we're we're calculating information. That's not a column that pre-exists. We're creating like a virtual column, if you will. This does still come from the payments table. And per the ask, it says group by customer. All right, that's all I have for that one. That's it. Run it. And then notice the output here, folks. Do your screenshots. Issues. No, I'm just, I was running on fix it. Okay, great, great. If you guys do get stuck here in class, please let me know. You can share screens and take a look. All right, we have one more to complete. And this one, we will do an inner join on this one. And I thought what might be kind of fun, right, is rather than me just type out the answer, I'm going to put the challenge out there, let you guys work on it for about 5-10 minutes here in class. And then we'll look at the solution and see if like what you thought the solution might be is actually correct. So a little bit of a kind of a challenge. So let's read through the description first. All right. And notice the output. So we're looking at total number of orders and the price. So we're looking at how many orders did you have and how much money did you bring in? That's a very managerial ask, right? How many people walked through the door and how much money did we make? Right? I mean, that's like if you guys work retail, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So seems like a really simple thing, but maybe there's a little bit more to it. So here's what I'm gonna kind of put in your head. How would you get the total number of orders? Okay. And then how would you get the total spent? What tables would you go to? What functions would you use? What tables might you have to join together? Even a bigger question. And then, well, I guess if you use the right functions, it'll give you the total. But it's a matter of extracting the right information from the right column. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pause the video here in class. We're going to put this challenge out there and see if the people here in the classroom what they come up with, and then I'll show you my solution. All right, so I've given the people here in the classroom a little time to think about how they might solve this. I also have a person on Zoom that seems to be on the right track. And the point is, can you get all this information really from one table? That's, yeah, and a few of you are already shaking your heads, and that's correct. You cannot get all the information from one table. Then the question becomes, what tables do you need to go to? So like, if I look at the orders table, right, and just like look at the info, right? So just let's take a look at the information. So it's an order number, date, when they need it by, when it was shipped, whether it was shipped or not, some comments, and the customer number. Okay, so that gives us the order number. And in principle, I should just be able to count those, right? To get total number of orders. That, I mean, it kind of seems right, doesn't it? All right, but okay, hold on a second. What if that order had multiple products in it? And you know what? The other thing is, wait a second, there's no total, there's no money amount here. So I have to go to, well, I could go to the payments table, right? We already looked at that, right? But that doesn't have an order number attached. That's just how much money came in. Okay, that's not good. Maybe I can go to order details and let's take a look inside of there. Well, that has the order number, the product code, quantity ordered, price each. Oh, and order line number. Okay. But what if they ordered 30? You see like what the conundrum is here, right? So there's a little bit of math that has to happen. And how do we, extract that information? Okay, so here's the procedure that I use to do this. The first thing I recognize is that I need those two tables to do this. So even though I would write a select statement first, I'm going to kind of right off the bat say from the orders table, I'll alias that as an O, right? So I'll just use O to describe it. And then I'm going to inner join that with the order, spell it right, details table, and I'll alias that as OD. So O is for orders, OD is for order details. Right, that for me, that I find that really helpful. Just go, okay, which tables am I dealing with? And I just write that part first, even though it's throwing errors at me. All right. From the order details table, I am noticing, right? So check this out. Here's order number. That's the same as this one, same as this one, same as this one. Correct? Okay. And then I also have the prices. Okay, so I mean, this is like convoluted information. It really is convoluted information, right? But the information is there, and I could, once again, I could drop it into Excel and write some formulas and figure it out and pull out a calculator, but we're trying to avoid that whole process. So what makes sense to me, right, is first, let's get a count from the order details table of the order number. Mind you, and think about this, if it appears more than once, is it going to count it twice? So in other words, if I have order number 100 listed 3 times, does that count that as 3 separate occurrences? No, it doesn't. Okay, so that's a summary right there. All right, so that will help us to narrow it down. And really, that will give us the total num, and the way they want the output to look is like this, as total num orders. So the one column in the output. The other part is we need to take the total of all the prices and put them together. And I'm going to tell you, I do find the order details table a little bit, let's say, confusing from the standpoint that they have the quantity ordered, the price each, and all that. And I've had this debate with students over time, like, well, shouldn't I multiply this by this and then add all those together, right? That's kind of like thinking. But I'm going to show you the workaround on this. There is a workaround, because if I take basically the sum, and this is a logical leap, by the way, right, of the price each, and we're going to output that as price total, I think is how they listed it. So we'll just follow what they're doing in the sample. Right. We're joining these two tables together, but there's a criteria here, which we can only do this, right, if the order number in the order details table is combined with an order number in the orders table. And that's like the piece that really ties it together, because in the orders table, notice that, it, so in other words, this order actually happened, is kind of what this indicates, right? Um, and then it really ties it to the customer number and all that. But we're really looking for the order here that ties us to the order number. So with this where clause, and this is how I did it. Now, there are other ways to come up with this, right? So I've had people write very complicated queries for this and still come up with the same answer. But really what I'm trying to demonstrate is because of the way a database functions, it doesn't work like you would, like the thinking of like, if you're writing like Python code is a little bit different than what we're doing here. Is really kind of what I'm like. So it's not like regular computer programming where I have to like dig in there. The data is already aggregated in weird ways in the database, and it's just a matter of us pulling it out in a meaningful way. Yes, we're applying functions to it, but I'm making sure that the order number in the orders table is there in the order number table, because there's kind of like this implication that it might not be. But just because you got an order, was the order processed is really kind of thinking. All right, let's run this query and see if I come up with the same thing. And notice I got an error. Did I misspell something? Oh yeah, I see it. Yes, yeah, it. I could tell right away the syntax is off. The unknown column. All right, well, that means it wasn't coming through. Now, are these the same values that we have in the example? Because the example in principle is the right values, 2996 and whatever that 271,945. Did I come up with the same values? And I did. So see how the information is aggregated. Now, I've had people argue, well, that's not the right number. You didn't do the math to calculate it. All right. So if you want to prove this wrong, I would challenge, I want to see your code that proves this wrong. And I would bet you'd still come up with the same numbers if you write a more complicated query. The kind of the goal of this is really to show you that some of the information is aggregated already, and it's just a matter of thinking about it in the right way to extract it, rather than write overly complicated queries when the information really in principle is already there. Right? That's kind of the goal of this. So that's the answer for the last one. And I know that one's kind of a weird one, but that's the solution, folks. Don't forget to save your work. So I'm going to go ahead and save this script, and I have like my, naming convention here for this semester, so that I'm just saving it. Remember, do your screenshots, and then if it's easy enough for you, submit the SQL file too so I can see it. Especially if you came up with a different solution for the last one, I'd love to see it. All right, folks, we're all done, and this recording ends here.